Jade Sinclair had never asked for the kind of fame that pressed against her ribs like a restless heartbeat, but once the world decided it wanted her, there was no turning back. Each day began with the flash of cameras, the sting of ring lights, and the constant vibration of her phone as notifications poured in. There were millions who watched her dance, sing, laugh, and look effortlessly alive. None of them ever saw the moments when she lay awake at night, hand over her chest, wondering when the applause would finally stop echoing. Her villa overlooked the sea, blue and endless, but even the waves felt scripted, like props in a performance she could never step away from. Her team insisted she keep posting, keep smiling, keep feeding the world the version of Jade that kept the sponsorships rolling in. So she did. She posed with sunlit cocktails, designer clothes, glittering makeup, and charm thick enough to hide the quiet ache she carried everywhere. That ache deepened after her latest hit went viral. She should have felt triumphant, but instead she felt hollow, like applause echoing inside an empty room. Her friends celebrated for her. Her fans cheered. But when the night came, when the music died down and the villa grew silent, Jade felt the weight of being truly, painfully alone. It was during one of those late, restless nights that she found the message. It wasn't from a brand or a fan or a fellow artist. It came from an account she didn't recognize, Jamaica Inside Outreach. At first, she assumed it was spam. But something about the short, thoughtful sentence caught her attention. Your music reaches places most people never see. Even behind bars. She reread it twice. Then a third time. Curiosity nudged her more than caution. She replied. The conversation that followed was unexpected, gentle, respectful, strangely grounding. The messages weren't from an organization, but from a single person named Elias Grant, an inmate serving time in St. Catherine. He apologized for the informal contact and explained he had access through a monitored program meant to encourage communication with the outside world. Jade almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She had actors, producers, and politicians sliding into her DMs, and yet here she was, talking to a man behind bars. But there was something about the way he typed, measured, calm, insightful, that felt different from anything she'd experienced lately. She told herself she'd stop after a few replies. She didn't. Over the next week, their conversations became a quiet thread woven through her days. When the industry became too loud, when the expectations smothered her, she found herself waiting for the next message from Elias. He asked questions no one else asked. He noticed things she never said aloud. He spoke with a softness that felt both soothing and unsettling. One night, after a long recording session that left her drained, she confided something she hadn't told anyone. I feel like everyone sees me, she typed, but no one actually knows me. His response came quickly. Then let me see you as you are. No lights. No stage. Her breath caught in her throat. Jade stared at the message for a long time, the glow of her screen painting her face in cold blue. No one in her life had offered her that honesty without agenda, attention without expectation. Still, a quiet voice inside her whispered that she was stepping into something she didn't fully understand. Something she might not be able to step back from. But before she could think too deeply, she typed back. And just like that, a door opened. One she would someday wish she'd never walked through. As she set her phone aside that night, Jade felt a strange anticipation humming beneath her loneliness, unaware that their next exchange would begin reshaping her life in irreversible ways. Jade woke earlier than usual the next morning, her phone still on the pillow beside her, the last message from Elias glowing faintly on the screen. It felt strange how someone she had never met, someone locked behind concrete walls and razor wire, had slipped so easily into her thoughts. The transition from casual curiosity to quiet routine had happened without warning. Each night now ended with his words. Each morning began with the echo of them. At first, the prison's communication rules made their conversations sporadic, short messages that arrived at odd hours, often delayed by monitoring. But Elias found ways to turn even those limits into something intimate. He sent long, handwritten letters through the outreach program, pages filled with reflections, memories, and emotions he claimed he had never shared with anyone. Jade read them slowly, tracing the shape of his handwriting with her finger as if the ink itself held part of his voice. He wrote about the silence of prison nights, about the way light filtered through barred windows, and about the ache of wanting connection in a place built to crush it. His vulnerability surprised her. It disarmed her. It also made her feel guilty that she had a villa overlooking the sea while he lived in a cell barely wider than his wingspan. Somehow that guilt became a bond. The restricted phone calls strengthened it. He was allowed only a few minutes, but he used them with a careful tenderness. "You sound tired," he would murmur. "Are they pushing you too hard again?" His voice was deeper than she expected, calm, steady, almost protective. In those brief calls, she didn't feel like a public figure or a product. She felt like a person. Jade began rearranging her schedule, first subtly, then blatantly. She canceled a photo shoot because the call window overlapped with it. She postponed a meeting with her agent when a letter from Elias arrived unexpectedly. She told herself it was harmless, that she was just being kind to someone who had no one else. But the truth pressed harder each day. She needed these moments with him more than she wanted to admit. Her friends noticed the shift. Anaya joked about Jade hiding a secret boyfriend, but Jade brushed it off. Her team asked why she wasn't posting as consistently. She blamed exhaustion, creative breaks, bad Wi-Fi, anything but the truth. The public adored the polished version of Jade Sinclair, and she knew the world would never understand her growing attachment to a convicted man. Still, when night came, she found herself checking her phone with a nervous flutter she had never felt even for men she had dated. Elias had a way of speaking that made her feel seen. He asked about her childhood, her fears, the pressures she never confessed to anyone. He remembered details she mentioned once and never repeated. He made her feel like she existed beyond the stage lights. One night, after reading a letter where he described dreaming of the ocean he hadn't touched in years, Jade felt a sharp pull in her chest. She imagined him alone in that cell, imagining waves he couldn't see. Without meaning to, she whispered into the empty room, "I wish you could see it." Her own words startled her. Something inside her had shifted again, quietly, dangerously. And as she folded the letter and set it beside the growing stack, she sensed that whatever she and Elias were becoming was no longer harmless. The thunder of that realization followed her into the next day, lingering like a warning she wasn't ready to confront. The next letters from Elias carried a weight Jade had not expected. They were no longer just casual conversations or shared confessions about music and mundane routines. He began telling her about himself, carefully, selectively, as though each word was measured for effect. At first, it was his childhood. A broken home, a father who disappeared when he was 5, a mother who struggled to survive and often couldn't protect him. He spoke of nights spent hiding in cramped corners, listening to arguments and violence he could never stop. "You grow up thinking the world owes you nothing," he wrote in one of the longer letters. "You learn quickly that trust is dangerous. That kindness can be used against you." Jade read the words with her fingers pressed to the page, feeling both sympathy and a stirring of unease. The imagery was vivid, raw, almost cinematic. Elias had a way of painting his life in shades that made her feel like she had been walking beside him all along, sharing his pain. Then came the story of the crime that landed him in prison. He didn't go into the lurid details, only framing it as a moment of survival, an accident that spiraled, a misjudgment punished disproportionately. "The law was never meant to save people like me," he said in one letter. "It was meant to make an example of someone who dared to survive in the only way they knew." Jade found herself believing him. His intelligence and calm reasoning created a narrative she could almost feel in her bones. A man shaped by circumstance, hardened by the world, punished unfairly. Each revelation drew her closer, pulling her into his story, into the quiet intimacy of being the only person who truly understood him. Yet, subtle shadows began to slip through the carefully constructed light. Occasionally, a line would betray a flicker of anger, a temper that seemed too sharp, too deliberate. One evening, a letter arrived with a strange tension in his tone. Sometimes, people make choices you can't forgive. And sometimes, you have to remind them why they should fear the consequences. Jade paused over the words, her stomach twisting, but she rationalized it. He had been hurt, after all, and the prison could twist anyone. The first hint of real concern came unexpectedly. Jade had arranged a call with him through the monitored program, and as she waited, a guard appeared briefly on the line, his expression wary. "You're speaking to Elias Grant," he said, glancing at her over the small glass partition. "Be careful. He's charming. Too charming. Don't let that fool you." Jade's heart skipped. She didn't know whether to laugh or recoil. A warning from a stranger should have been insignificant. Yet the subtle tension in the guard's voice gnawed at her, leaving a lingering unease she couldn't easily dismiss. That night, she reread every letter Elias had sent, analyzing the phrasing, the pauses, the unspoken undertones. There were moments of warmth and honesty, but beneath them, a thread of possessiveness hinted at a complexity she wasn't ready to untangle. She pushed the worry aside, telling herself it was fear speaking, not reality. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted, one that would quietly grow as their bond deepened. Despite the flickers of unease, Jade felt a thrill she hadn't experienced in years. In his words, she found a tension she had never truly known, care she had never received, and a fascination that bordered on obsession. She didn't see it yet, but the careful, measured revelations of Elias' past were constructing not just trust, but dependence. And so, as she folded the final letter and pressed it to her chest, Jade felt the gravity of her connection to him deepen. She didn't yet understand that the man who seemed wounded, thoughtful, and vulnerable had layers she could neither see nor predict, layers that would soon challenge everything she believed about love, control, and danger. The next visit was scheduled for the following week. Jade didn't know it yet, but that encounter would mark the moment the distance between them began to collapse, and the thin barrier of safety that separated her from Elias' world started to crumble. The morning Jade arrived at St. Catherine Prison, the air felt different, thick, heavy, as if the weight of what awaited her had already begun pressing against her chest. The sun reflected off the high walls, the razor wire atop them glinting like sharp silver teeth. She had seen prisons in movies, in news reports, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of being here in person. Her heels clicked nervously against the concrete floors, echoing through the sterile hallways as she passed security checkpoints and metal detectors. Every step reminded her that she was crossing a boundary, one that most people never dared to approach. When she finally reached the visitation area, she saw him for the first time, Elias Grant. He was seated on the other side of the thick glass, a faint outline behind the metal screen. His eyes found hers immediately, and for a moment, she felt an odd sense of relief. The distance between them was maddening, frustrating, but it was also intoxicating. She wanted to reach through the glass and touch him, and yet the barrier made him seem even more desirable, more untouchable. "Jade," he said softly, his voice resonating even through the receiver. "You came." "I did," she whispered, her fingers trembling as they held the plastic phone. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from a strange, overwhelming intensity that had nothing to do with her usual adrenaline on stage. They spoke cautiously at first, exchanging pleasantries that barely skimmed the surface. Then, gradually, Elias began probing, his questions deliberate, his tone deepening. "Did you eat well today? Did anyone pressure you to work or smile when you didn't want to?" Jade was taken aback by how much he seemed to care, how he noticed details about her life that no one else did. She told him the truth about the long rehearsals, the public appearances, the way exhaustion often felt heavier than the applause. He listened quietly, responding with empathy, but always with a hint of authority, as if he expected her to obey his unspoken rules. "You can't let anyone control your heart, Jade," he said suddenly, his voice harder. "Not your team, not the fans. Only you. But when it comes to me, I need to know you're mine completely." Her stomach twisted, a combination of exhilaration and unease. She didn't want to question him. She wanted to believe his words, to surrender to the strange gravity he exerted. And so she nodded silently, gripping the phone tighter. Hours passed like minutes. They shared stories, confessions, and laughter, but beneath the surface was a thread of possessiveness. Elias wanted her attention. He wanted her loyalty. He even hinted at her silence. What they shared must remain private. And though a small voice in Jade's head screamed caution, she ignored it. The emotional intensity was addictive, a hunger she hadn't realized she possessed. She left the prison that day feeling both exhilarated and drained. The glass barrier now burned into her memory like a cruel tease. She could see him, hear him, speak to him, but she could not touch him. And somehow, that distance only deepened her obsession. She felt tethered to him, drawn forward by invisible threads that tightened with every shared word. Back in her villa, Jade stared at the city lights shimmering against the ocean, the images on her phone fading as she replayed their conversation. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, yet there was a shadow creeping along the edges of her excitement. Something in Elias' demands, the subtle insistence, the possessive tone, whispered danger, but she told herself she could manage it. She always did. Unaware, she was stepping deeper into a web that could not be undone. The barrier had kept her safe until now, but the pull of Elias' presence was beginning to outweigh the walls meant to protect her. And when the next twist arrived, his unexpected release, it would shatter the distance entirely, forcing Jade to confront the man she had allowed to dominate her thoughts, her time, and her life. Jade couldn't stop smiling the morning she received the call from Elias' lawyer. Her hands shook as she pressed the phone to her ear, barely able to focus on the words. "It's official," the voice on the line said. "Elias Grant is eligible for early release. The paperwork clears him in 2 days. He'll be out." Her chest tightened in a mix of exhilaration and disbelief. She had secretly ensured the legal fees were covered, rationalizing it as a kindness, a chance at love finally free from the walls and bars that had contained it. Now, the idea of holding him in her arms, of finally touching him without glass or distance, consumed her entirely. Love had conquered every obstacle, or so she thought. When Elias walked out of the prison gates, the afternoon sun caught the sharp lines of his face, and for a moment, Jade felt breathless. He looked different, still the man she had spoken to in letters, still measured in his movements, but there was something new in his gaze, a confidence sharpened by the experience of confinement, a sense of power she hadn't anticipated. "Jade," he said, his voice low, as if testing the space between them. "You really waited for me?" "Yes," she whispered, stepping closer, ignoring the stir of warning in her chest. Her hands reached for his, and for the first time, skin met skin. The connection was electric, intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. The first few days together were blissful, a whirlwind of stolen moments and quiet declarations of affection. Jade allowed herself to believe she had won, that the distance and danger of the prison days had been replaced by trust, love, and shared freedom. But she didn't notice the subtle shifts. Elias began rearranging her villa, insisting he knew better where things should go. He scrutinized her phone, her schedule, her interactions with friends. It started gently, questions, suggestions, but grew with a quiet insistence that Jade found herself obeying without realizing how much control she was relinquishing. "Jade, I don't like that person coming over," he said one evening, glancing at a close friend she hadn't seen in months. "They don't understand you like I do. They can't be trusted." She nodded, the words slipping past her lips automatically. She told herself it was for her own safety, for their privacy, but the tension in her chest tightened with each directive. Where once their relationship had been sustained by longing and distance, it now thrived on proximity and domination. Elias' charm remained, but it was laced with authority. When he laughed, it was not just joy, it was confirmation that he held the power to determine her mood, her choices, her life. His protective voice, the same voice that had soothed her fears through glass and letters, now carried an edge, a subtle threat masked as care. Jade tried to ignore it, convincing herself that it was part of his transition from prison to freedom, that he simply needed to assert himself after years of confinement. She immersed herself in the illusion, decorating the villa with flowers, cooking meals they could share, laughing at his jokes. She wanted to believe he was the same gentle soul she had fallen for. But the truth was in the way he watched her, not just seeing but scrutinizing, in the way he reacted when she spoke with her team or received messages on her phone. He was territorial, insisting she belong entirely to him, and his demands, once subtle, now blatant, went unchallenged because she still believed she loved him. Late at night, when she lay awake listening to his slow breathing beside her, Jade felt a flicker of unease she couldn't quite name. It was there, just at the edge of her consciousness, but she dismissed it. She clung to the warmth of his presence, to the dream of love she had imagined for months. She didn't know that this was only the beginning, that the same hands that had written her comforting letters could also wield control and darkness, shaping the world around her to suit his will. And when the first signs of isolation began, friends kept away, calls unanswered, her life subtly shrinking, the villa, once a sanctuary, would slowly transform into a cage. A cage of her own making, and one she wouldn't see until it was almost too late. It started with subtle signs. A shadow under Jade's eye that didn't belong to a sleepless night, a faint bruise on her wrist barely hidden beneath a bracelet. Anaya noticed first, the way her friend flinched when adjusting her sleeve, the way she quickly applied makeup to cover the imperfections. "Jade, what's going on?" she asked gently during a lunch at a quiet cafe, her voice laced with worry. Jade forced a laugh, brushing the concern aside. "It's nothing. Just a silly accident," she said, but the lie tasted bitter even as it left her lips. She wanted to protect Elias, to keep the illusion alive. She wanted to believe that love could forgive shadows, that his intensity was just a side effect of the passion that had drawn her to him. But the bruises were only the beginning. Arguments started to flare like sudden storms, small things blowing into fierce confrontations. Elias would demand explanations for her calls, for her meetings, for her thoughts. "Who was that on the phone?" he asked one night, voice low but sharp. "Tell me exactly what was said." Jade complied, her stomach nodding each time. Resistance was never an option. It wasn't a debate. It was control dressed as concern. Slowly, insidiously, Elias began isolating her. He insisted her manager was untrustworthy, her assistants were distractions, her team only interested in her fame. Within days, he had coerced her into firing them, claiming it was for her own safety, for the purity of their relationship. "I just want you to be safe," he said, and she nodded. But the walls were closing in, and she didn't see the bars forming around her until they were already set. Her social media presence, once vibrant and alive, began to dwindle. Posts were delayed, stories disappeared, collaborations canceled. Fans noticed, commented, speculated, but Jade offered only vague explanations. Creative breaks, personal reasons, exhaustion. No one suspected the quiet suffocation she felt behind closed doors. Anaya tried again, harder this time. "You're disappearing, Jade. You're hiding, and it's not just for your safety. Something's wrong." Jade's eyes filled with tears, but she swallowed them. "It's fine, Anaya. Really. I'm just focusing on myself." But focusing on herself meant complying with Elias' growing demands. She stopped attending recording sessions without him, she turned down interviews, and she began canceling public appearances. Each refusal was justified by a lie, a fabricated reason, but the weight on her chest grew heavier with every cancelled engagement. Inside the villa, the atmosphere shifted. Silence pressed against the walls, punctuated by Elias' sharp instructions, the subtle threats beneath his care. Jade moved carefully, always calculating, always measuring her words, always watching for the flicker of disapproval in his eyes. The house that once promised love now felt like a labyrinth, each room a reminder of the walls closing in around her life, her freedom, her identity. And yet, despite everything, she clung to the moments of tenderness, those fleeting minutes when he smiled genuinely, when his hand brushed hers, when the soft voice she had once fallen for returned briefly from the shadows. They were enough to keep her hope alive, enough to make her justify the fear, enough to make her believe she could navigate the danger without losing herself entirely. But the truth lingered in the quiet, in the hidden bruises, in the cancelled calls, in the absence of the life she had once loved. It whispered that the price of her devotion was higher than she imagined. Jade didn't know it yet, but the isolation, the control, the silent suffocation, these were only the first steps. The next confrontation, when she finally tried to reclaim a fragment of independence, would be far more dangerous, forcing her to face the reality she had been avoiding for months. Jade sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone, trembling. For weeks she had tried to convince herself that she could live within the cage Elias had built around her life. But the truth she had uncovered, the real story behind his crime, shattered every illusion she had held. He had not been the victim of circumstance he claimed. The violence he had inflicted was deliberate, calculated, far darker than she could have imagined. Her hands shook as she typed the words she had rehearsed a dozen times in her head. Elias, we need to talk. I can't do this anymore. She hesitated, her finger hovering over send, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. When she finally pressed it, the silence afterward was unbearable. Minutes later, his reply arrived, swift and measured. Why would you do this? Don't you know I need you? Jade tried to steel herself. She had rehearsed responses, explanations, defenses, but every word seemed inadequate. She typed again, I can't pretend anymore. I can't ignore the truth. We're over. The phone buzzed instantly. Elias' messages came in rapid succession, each more insistent than the last. You don't mean that. You can't leave me. I'll hurt myself if you walk away. No one else will ever love you like I do. You'll regret this. Her heart raced. She had read about manipulation before, studied it in books, in documentaries, but feeling it, experiencing it in real time, was suffocating. His words were knives hidden inside velvet, cutting into her resolve while disguising themselves as love. I can't do this, she whispered to herself, clutching the phone to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to erase the messages. She refused to give in. Then the tone shifted. The gentle, pleading voice became sharp, venomous. If you tell anyone about me, if you try to leave, your career is over. Your fans will turn. Your friends will abandon you. They'll see you as weak, naive, complicit. Jade felt the ground shift beneath her. This was not love. This was a calculated strategy to break her, to make her doubt her own strength. He was using every tool at his disposal, fear, guilt, public image, to trap her in a web of psychological control. She remembered the bruises, the isolation, the cancelled appearances. Every red flag she had tried to ignore now screamed at her. And yet, beneath the terror, beneath the manipulation, a small flame of defiance remained. She would not let him win completely. But even as she tried to steady herself, she realized the fight was only beginning. Elias' influence stretched further than she had imagined, touching not only her personal life but her professional world. The man she had once loved from afar had now become a force capable of dismantling everything she had built. Jade wiped her tears, exhaling shakily. She understood that leaving him would not be simple, that escape would require careful planning, strategy, and strength she didn't fully know she possessed. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could reclaim her freedom, a life beyond the villa, beyond the constant scrutiny, beyond Elias' suffocating grip. Yet even in that fragile hope, the fear lingered. The next step, the attempt to sever the bond, would force her to confront his darkest instincts. And when that moment arrived, Jade realized there would be no turning back. For now, she made a promise to herself. She would fight, she would plan, and she would survive. The cage was real, the danger immediate, but so was the spark of resistance that refused to be extinguished. And as she placed her phone down and stared at the ceiling, Jade could feel the storm gathering, the confrontation, the escape, the inevitable reckoning that would come next. Jade knew she couldn't stay trapped any longer. The fear that had once kept her compliant now morphed into a steely determination. After days of silent planning, she finally reached out to her old manager, Marcus, someone she trusted implicitly. She had kept him at a distance since Elias had convinced her to fire her team, but now, in whispered messages and hidden phone calls, she explained everything. The isolation, the control, the threats, the suffocating dominance. Marcus didn't hesitate. We'll get you out safely, he said, his voice low but firm. We just need to be careful. One wrong move and he'll know. Over the next few days, Jade took cautious, calculated steps. She had the locks on the villa changed under the guise of routine maintenance, making sure Elias had no idea. She installed discreet security cameras, placed hidden alarms, and created an emergency fund of cash, hidden in a location only she knew. Each step gave her a small surge of adrenaline, a tiny flicker of freedom in a life that had felt entirely dictated by another person. But Elias was not blind. Subtle shifts did not escape him. The way she hesitated before answering messages, the sudden secrecy in her scheduling, the faint tension in her voice, it all registered. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, his paranoia began to flare. He asked where she had been, questioned who she had spoken to, and scrutinized every digital interaction. Jade smiled and nodded, deflecting, downplaying, pretending her movements were ordinary. Then came the following. He stalked her phone, checking messages, observing her conversations. He shadowed her outside, turning up unexpectedly near her favorite cafe, at her gym, even at her private recording studio. The air seemed to constrict around her whenever he appeared, as though the very space she occupied was no longer hers. Her villa, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage, and even the most mundane outings became exercises in tension and calculated deception. One evening, as Jade rehearsed a new song in the studio, she noticed him standing across the street, leaning against a wall, his gaze fixed on her. Her heart thudded violently, but she forced herself to keep playing, to continue the illusion that everything was normal. She couldn't afford panic. Panic would alert him. Every fiber of her body screamed for her to flee, but she knew that an abrupt move could trigger the very danger she was trying to escape. At home, she reviewed her plan again, double-checking every contingency. She mapped out her escape route, memorized which rooms offered the fastest exit, and rehearsed the messages she would send Marcus if anything went wrong. Every detail mattered. Every small decision was a step toward reclaiming her life. Despite her fear, a strange sense of empowerment crept into Jade's mind. She realized that while Elias had controlled her world for months, he had underestimated her resilience. Every small victory, the changed locks, the hidden cash, the secret calls, was proof that she still had agency. She just needed to act decisively. Yet the tension in the air was suffocating. Elias' presence, both literal and psychological, pressed against her constantly, reminding her that one misstep could have devastating consequences. She could feel his influence in every corner, in every interaction, in every decision she made. And as she prepared for the next day, the day she would make a real attempt to reclaim her freedom, Jade felt a mixture of fear and clarity. The confrontation was inevitable. The risk was high. But the alternative, remaining imprisoned in a life she no longer owned, was unbearable. Tomorrow she would move. Tomorrow, the cage would either begin to crumble, or the walls would close completely around her. The storm had arrived earlier than expected, dark clouds swallowing the horizon, waves crashing violently against the shore visible through Jade's villa windows. She drove home alone, heart hammering with anticipation, certain Elias was elsewhere, somewhere that would allow her a moment of freedom. The villa, bathed in the occasional flash of lightning, seemed welcoming, almost ordinary. But the air was thick with tension, and she could feel the weight of months of fear and secrecy pressing down on her chest. As she stepped inside, the power flickered once, twice, and then the entire house plunged into darkness. Her phone's dim screen offered the only illumination, casting eerie shadows across the furniture, painting familiar shapes into sinister outlines. Jade's pulse quickened. She whispered his name softly, almost laughing nervously at herself. "Elias? It's just me." No response. Only the sound of rain hammering against the windows. Then she heard it, a slow, deliberate step, not hers. She froze, straining to locate the source, heart thrumming violently. "Elias," she called again, her voice tighter this time. The footsteps paused, then moved closer, echoing through the vast, dark space of the villa. Jade's breath came in shallow bursts. She gripped the phone like a lifeline, imagining the escape routes she had mapped, rehearsing the words she might scream if confronted. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating a figure in the hallway, Elias. His eyes glinted with something fierce, something she had never seen before, rage, fear, possession, all intertwined. "Jade," he said, voice low and dangerous, almost trembling with suppressed emotion. "You think you can just leave? After everything?" She felt the weight of the months, the letters, the calls, the manipulation, crushing her, but a spark of defiance ignited. "I can't do this anymore, Elias," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "I'm leaving. Tonight." His face shifted, a strange mixture of hurt and fury twisting his features. "Leaving? After all I've given you? After everything I've done for you?" His hands clenched at his sides, trembling with barely contained anger. "You belong to me, Jade. Don't you understand? You always have." Jade swallowed hard, tears threatening to fall. "No," she whispered. "I belong to myself. I won't live like this anymore. I'm done being afraid." The reaction was instantaneous. He lunged, and in the chaos, their confrontation escalated. Shouts, tears, objects knocked to the floor, the storm outside mirroring the tempest inside. His control, his obsession, the twisted love he claimed to feel, it all collided with her desperate need for freedom. Every word he spat was both accusation and plea, both love and threat, blending together in a terrifying, emotional storm. She dodged, weaved, spoke sharply, trying to assert herself, to maintain even a sliver of control. "I can't keep living in your shadow," she cried. "I've tried to love you, but this isn't love anymore." For a moment, the world seemed to hang between them, the flash of lightning illuminating his expression, the deafening sound of rain on the roof, the pounding of her own heart. And then, in the chaos of emotion and fear, Jade realized she had reached the point of no return. The man she had once adored, the voice that had soothed her through prison walls, had become a predator in the home they shared. By the time the first faint glimmer of dawn threatened the storm, Jade stood trembling but resolute, drenched from the rain that had leaked through the roof and from the fear that still pulsed through her veins. Elias stared at her, chest heaving, eyes blazing with a mixture of sorrow and rage. The confrontation had ended, but the danger had not. She now knew with absolute clarity that leaving him would demand more than courage. It would demand strategy, precision, and a strength she was only beginning to summon. The storm outside raged on, echoing the storm that had erupted inside the villa, and Jade understood that the next steps, her escape, her fight for freedom, would be the most perilous moments of her life. The morning broke gray and cold, the storm's remnants leaving the beaches littered with debris and driftwood. News outlets buzzed with a story that no one in Jamaica wanted to hear. A woman's body had been discovered near the jagged cliffs of Portland Parish. Her features were recognizable instantly to those who followed celebrity culture. Social media erupted. Comments, theories, tributes, and grief poured across every platform. And then the name spread like wildfire, Jade Sinclair. The nation stopped. Offices, schools, markets, and cafes all seemed to pause, collectively gasping at the news. A rising star, beloved for her music, her bold personality, and her seemingly untouchable energy, was gone. The outrage was immediate. How could something like this happen here? How could someone so vibrant vanish into darkness? Police descended on the coastline, carefully photographing the scene, collecting evidence, and canvassing witnesses. Beachgoers spoke of seeing a small boat offshore during the storm, rocking dangerously in the waves. Digital traces, text messages, call logs, and social media posts painted a picture of her final days, revealing tension, fear, and the hidden struggle behind her vanished posts. Detectives began piecing together a trail that led directly to Elias Grant. His recent release from prison, his documented obsession with Jade, and the security footage showing him near her villa became key elements of the investigation. Officers traced his movements, his online communications, and even the purchases that funded his earlier legal release. The meticulous web of evidence formed a damning picture. As journalists descended on the villa, neighbors whispered about the strange dynamics they had glimpsed, the abrupt end to her appearances, the tension that had hung over the house like a storm cloud. Reports surfaced of friends noticing bruises, canceled engagements, and a growing isolation that no one had fully understood until now. Each revelation added to the narrative. This was no accident. This was deliberate. The media framed the case as a national obsession. Panel discussions dissected every known detail of Lled's life, every public interaction, every digital footprint. News anchors emphasized her popularity and influence, contrasting it with the horror of her disappearance and the brutality of her death. Opinion pieces debated the failures of those who should have noticed her peril, while documentary filmmakers saw a story that would dominate the airwaves for months. Even in death, lled became omnipresent. Her music streamed faster than ever, fans created tributes, and hashtags circulated relentlessly. The island's collective grief was punctuated by a mix of fascination, horror, and anger. People demanded justice, demanded accountability, demanded that Elias Grant answer for the woman he had once claimed to love. Meanwhile, investigators discovered subtle but undeniable evidence of premeditation, messages showing manipulation, surveillance of her movements, and records of purchases tied to her private villa. It painted a chilling portrait of a man who had carefully orchestrated the end of a life that had captivated the nation. The news cycle fed itself. Every image of Lled's smiling face in concerts, interviews, and viral videos contrasted sharply with the brutal reality that had ended her life. The story became more than a celebrity tragedy. It became a cautionary tale, a symbol of obsession, control, and the unseen dangers that lurked behind fame. And as authorities closed in on Elias, preparing to arrest him, the island itself seemed to hold its breath. The case of Lled Sinclair had broken through every wall of privacy, secrecy, and illusion, leaving a trail of grief, outrage, and unanswered questions. The world knew the name Elias Grant now, and they would never forget the body that had washed ashore, the life it had once held, or the dark truths hidden beneath the surface of celebrity, love, and obsession. Elias Grant was brought into custody quietly, surrounded by officers who had tracked his movements with meticulous precision. The moment he was placed in the interrogation room, the cold sterility of the fluorescent lights contrasted sharply with the warmth of the villa he had once called home. Here, he was no longer the commanding presence, the charming manipulator, the man who had whispered promises and threats with equal ease. Here, he was contained, restrained by steel, paper, and procedure. Detectives entered with notebooks and cameras, setting up the room with a clinical detachment that contrasted sharply with the raw emotions surrounding Lled's death. They placed him in the chair, cuffs heavy on his wrists, and began the questioning. At first, he answered slowly, measured, almost bored, as if recounting a story he had rehearsed countless times in his own mind. "Yes," he said when asked about his relationship with Lled. "I loved her. I still do. But she didn't understand. She never understood the depth of what we had. She wanted freedom. I couldn't allow that. Not from me. Not from anyone." The detectives probed further, pushing him to recount the final night. His tone was calm, chillingly detached as he described the storm, the darkness, and the confrontation. "She tried to leave. She thought she could just disappear. I told her she couldn't. I told her we were together, forever, whether she wanted it or not. She screamed, cried, begged. It only made me insist more." Every word sent a shiver through the officers listening. The transition from lover to predator, from devotion to obsession, was laid bare with surgical clarity. His words painted Lled not as a victim of chance, but as a person caught in a deliberate, suffocating web that he had spun with care, manipulation, and rage. When asked if he had planned her death, Elias hesitated briefly, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "I didn't want to hurt her at first," he said, voice flat. "But love demands proof. She wanted to leave. She had to understand what that meant. I couldn't let her go, and in the end, I couldn't stop myself." There was no remorse, no pleading. Just the cold, measured truth of a man who had always placed his desire above the life of another. The detectives recorded every word, every inflection, every subtle admission that revealed the layers of control, obsession, and violence that had defined his relationship with Lled. Outside the interrogation room, news of Elias' capture spread rapidly. The nation, still grieving the loss of their beloved star, watched the unfolding case with a mixture of horror and fascination. Discussions turned from speculation to outrage as the full scope of his manipulation, isolation, and eventual violence came to light. Lled's legacy, however, was not erased. Fans, friends, and family remembered her vibrancy, her courage, and the light she had brought to the world. Yet, her story also became a cautionary tale, a warning about the hidden dangers of obsession, the subtle signs of abuse, and the peril of investing hope and love in someone unwilling or incapable of saving themselves. When the trial began, prosecutors presented the evidence methodically: the letters, the messages, the surveillance footage, and the testimony of friends and former employees who had witnessed the warning signs. Each exhibit painted a picture of premeditation and control, leaving the courtroom and the public stunned at the depth of lled's calculated manipulation. Conviction was swift. Sentences were pronounced, and justice, though delayed, was finally served. Yet even in the courtroom's cold efficiency, there was a lingering sadness. Justice could not restore the life that had been stolen, nor could it undo the months of fear, isolation, and manipulation that had shaped lled's final days. lled was once again in chains, this time by law, this time for the remainder of his life. But the real chains, the ones he had forged around lled's mind, her career, her freedom, remained as a haunting testament to his control and cruelty. Lled's name would live on, remembered not only for her talent and charisma but as a tragic emblem of love turned dangerous, of devotion exploited, and of the price paid for seeing the good in someone who could never reciprocate. Her story ended in loss, but it also endured as a stark, unflinching warning. Sometimes, the person you try to save is beyond saving, and loving someone too deeply can carry consequences no one can survive. The storm had passed, leaving the island quiet, almost eerily still. Waves lapped gently against the shore, a stark contrast to the violent chaos that had defined the weeks before. Lled Sinclair was gone, but the ripples of her life, her death, and the story of her final months continued to echo across Jamaica and beyond. Families, friends, fans, and colleagues gathered to mourn, to reflect, and to try to understand how someone so bright could have vanished into darkness without warning. At the memorial, flowers covered the stage, a sea of colors that mirrored the energy Lled had once brought to the world. Candles flickered in the evening breeze, tiny flames against the darkness, each one a symbol of remembrance. Friends shared memories, laughs and tears intertwining as they spoke of her infectious smile, her fierce determination, and the rare kindness she had shown even in fleeting moments. Anaya stood silently near the front, holding a single white rose. She thought of all the warnings she had whispered, all the subtle signs she had tried to reveal, and the weight of helplessness pressed on her chest. She realized there was nothing she could have done to fully shield Lled from lled. Yet in her grief, there was also resolve, a commitment to ensure that Lled's story would serve as a warning, a lesson, and a source of change for others trapped in similar circumstances. Media outlets covered the trial extensively, replaying footage, reading excerpts of letters, and dissecting the legal process that had finally held lled accountable. The nation watched the courtroom scenes unfold, the man who had once commanded Lled's heart now bound in chains, his cold demeanor replaced by the reality of judgment. Justice had been served, but the victory was hollow. Nothing could bring Lled back, and nothing could erase the scars left by the months of manipulation and fear. Even in her absence, Lled's presence lingered. Her music saw a surge in streams, not just for the melodies she had created, but for the message her life now carried. Every lyric, every performance became a testament to her resilience, her courage, and her brief, shining impact on the world. Fans left letters, art, and videos, transforming grief into collective memory. In a way, she had become immortal, not as a victim, but as a symbol. Lled's former villa stood quiet, empty, its halls still echoing with memories of laughter and fear, love and obsession. Security measures remained, a silent reminder of the control that had once dominated her life. Marcus and Anaya worked together to salvage what they could of her career, ensuring that her legacy would reflect her talent and spirit, rather than the tragedy that had ended it. Months later, the island began to heal. Conversations emerged about the signs of coercion, the subtle abuse often hidden behind charm, fame, or devotion. Workshops and awareness campaigns drew on Lled's story to educate others, to prevent future tragedies, and to honor her memory by transforming loss into learning. Her life had been taken too soon, but its lessons remained vivid and unflinching. Anaya visited the shore often, gazing at the horizon where the ocean met the sky, imagining Lled there, free, unafraid, radiant as she had always been. She whispered a final promise: to remember, to fight, and to honor the courage it had taken to love someone and survive their shadow. The storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake, but it also left clarity. Jade Sinclair's life, short yet incandescent, became more than headlines and heartbreak. It became a beacon, a call to recognize the hidden dangers, to protect the vulnerable, and to remember that love, when twisted by obsession, can become deadly. And in the quiet that followed, the island remembered her, not just for the tragedy, but for the brilliance and courage she had brought into every note, every smile, every fleeting moment. Jade's light, though extinguished too soon, had left an indelible mark on the world.